To understand the sheer magnitude of Russia's wealth, you have to look beneath the ice and soil of the largest country on Earth. Covering over 17 million square kilometers, or 11% of the world's landmass, Russia sits upon an undisputed geological gold mine valued at an estimated $75 trillion. This staggering figure makes it the wealthiest nation on the planet in terms of natural resources. This is not just a country, it is a planetary vault. The foundation of this unimaginable valuation rests primarily on fossil fuels and industrial metals, buried deep within the unforgiving terrains of Siberia and the Russian Far East. For decades, this bedrock of resources has not only powered the domestic economy, but has dictated global geopolitics, serving as a powerful geopolitical weapon and an endless river of capital for the state. When we break down what Russia actually produces, natural gas is the undisputed king. The Russian Federation holds the largest proven natural gas reserves in the world, sitting on a mind-bending 47 trillion cubic meters. To put that into perspective, that is nearly a quarter of all the known natural gas on the entire planet. State-controlled energy giant Gazprom oversees this empire, extracting an average of 600 to 700 billion cubic meters of gas every single year. The scale of the extraction infrastructure is terrifyingly massive, with fields like Urengoy and Yamburg in western Siberia operating in temperatures that drop to -50 degrees Celsius. These hyper-giant fields are marvels of extreme engineering, pumping out the very lifeblood that heats cities across the northern hemisphere. But gas is only half of the energy equation. Russia is also an absolute colossus in crude oil production. Holding roughly 80 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the country consistently ranks among the top 3 oil producers globally, going head-to-head with the United States and Saudi Arabia. State champions like Rosneft and Lukoil pump out between 10.5 and 11 million barrels of oil per day. That translates to roughly 10% of the entire world's daily oil consumption. The extraction process spans from the aging wells of the Volga-Ural region to the highly complex, technologically demanding offshore rigs in the freezing Arctic Ocean. Every 24 hours, enough crude is pulled from the Russian permafrost to fill thousands of supertankers, representing a daily, relentless harvest of black gold. Beyond the liquid wealth, the solid earth of Russia is equally overloaded with treasure. The country is the world's second-largest holder of coal, with reserves estimated at 157 billion tons. Furthermore, it dominates the global diamond trade. State-owned Alrosa is responsible for nearly 30% of the world's rough diamond production, extracting millions of carats annually from gigantic spiraling vortex-like mines in Yakutia, such as the famous Mir mine. Additionally, Russia is a top global producer of gold, mining approximately 300 tons a year, alongside vast quantities of palladium, platinum, and nickel, elements absolutely critical for the global automotive and aerospace industries. If you drive a car, use a smartphone, or wear a diamond, there is a high probability a piece of it was ripped from the Russian earth. So where does this ocean of resources go? Historically, the European markets were the primary and most lucrative destination. However, recent global trade shifts and complex new economic realities have triggered a massive and rapid recalibration. Today, the energy arteries flow firmly east. The power of Siberia, a monumental 3,000-kilometer pipeline, pumps up to 38 billion cubic meters of gas annually directly into the industrial heart of China. Meanwhile, a vast alternative network of independent maritime logistics operates across the oceans, navigating new global trade barriers to deliver millions of barrels of crude to massive emerging markets like India and Turkey. India alone has multiplied its imports of this resource by over 10 times in recent years. The entire global supply chain has essentially been rewired to keep this massive export machine running at maximum capacity. Selling off a continent's worth of resources generates an astronomical financial windfall. The capital generated from these global exports defies standard economic comprehension. Depending on international market prices, these energy revenues alone pump between $120 and $150 billion directly into the federal treasury every single year. During peak market surges, total energy export revenues have easily eclipsed $300 billion in a 12-month period. These funds serve as the absolute bedrock of the national economy, historically accounting for 30% to 40% of the entire state budget. It is this exact relentless revenue stream that funds massive domestic projects, grand-scale infrastructure, and strategic national reserves. It functions as an endless geyser of capital that ensures the economic system remains continuously fortified, regardless of external economic shifts. However, controlling $75 trillion of national wealth does not mean the wealth belongs to the nation. The privatization of state assets in the 1990s birthed the oligarchs, a small, ultra-exclusive circle of billionaires who seized control of the oil, gas, and metal sectors. Today, wealth inequality in Russia is among the most extreme in the developed world. A staggering statistic reveals that the top 500 wealthiest individuals in Russia control more net worth than the poorest 114 million citizens combined. The profits from the Siberian permafrost are frequently funneled through complex offshore shell companies, ultimately manifesting as mega yachts, private jets, and luxury real estate in Dubai, London, and the French Riviera. The natural wealth of the nation was essentially consolidated into the hands of a few dozen men. This brings us to the tragic irony of the Russian citizen. How do the people live while sleeping on top of $75 trillion? For the vast majority outside the glittering, hyper-modern bubbles of Moscow and St. Petersburg, the reality is incredibly harsh. The average monthly salary in Russia hovers around $700 to $800 but the median wage, what the average person actually takes home, is significantly lower, often less than $500 a month in rural provinces. Despite living in the country with the most natural gas on Earth, roughly 20% to 30% of households in remote areas still lack indoor plumbing or central heating, relying on chopping firewood to survive the brutal winters. The wealth generated beneath their feet completely bypasses their communities. The economic structure, heavily reliant on resource exports, makes the daily life of a citizen incredibly vulnerable to global market shocks and inflation. While the state treasury swells with oil dollars, the average Russian faces skyrocketing costs for basic necessities. Sanctions and a wartime economy have driven inflation up, heavily eroding purchasing power. Citizens are forced to spend a massive percentage of their income just on food and basic utilities. The national healthcare and education systems in the provinces are chronically underfunded, slowly decaying because the trillion-dollar energy profits are prioritized for state reserves, geopolitical projects, and elite pockets rather than social infrastructure. The citizen is an observer of wealth, never a participant. Russia represents the ultimate textbook definition of the resource curse. It is a nation blessed with infinite geological riches, yet cursed by how that wealth is managed. The $75 trillion buried in the earth has built invincible state corporations, birthed a class of untouchable billionaires, and shaped the fate of modern Europe and Asia. Yet, it has fundamentally failed to elevate the standard of living for the everyday Russian to the level of other developed nations. The citizen remains trapped in a system where the ground they walk on is priceless, but their own economic future remains uncertain. The giant pumps will never stop pulling wealth from the earth, but for the millions living above it, the cold reality remains exactly the same.